Listen. That is the sound of the Eastern Front, 1943. It is not the blast of artillery or the rattle of machine guns. It is a more intimate, more terrible sound. It is the sound of a human being bleeding out, alone in the frozen mud. For a German soldier wounded on the battlefields of World War II, this was often the final sound they would ever hear. Not a comforting word from a comrade, not the skilled hands of a medic, but the slow, creeping silence of abandonment. The German military medical system, for all its pre-war scientific prowess, was built on a foundation of cold, brutal calculus. It was a system of triage, not of salvation. A soldier's worth was measured against the immediate tactical situation, against the availability of transport, against the sheer, overwhelming volume of broken men. If your wound was too severe, if the line was about to break, if the retreat was sounded, you were left behind. A morphine vial and a Luger pistol were often the only mercy offered. This was not an exception. It was policy. It was a grim acceptance of a horrifying reality. Now, let's cross the lines. Let's go to a muddy field in Normandy, France, 1944. The sound is different here. It's the constant, thudding chop of rotor blades. It's the urgent, shouted commands of medics sprinting through incoming fire. It's the low rumble of a jeep, not carrying ammunition but carrying plasma. Here, a wounded American soldier is not a problem to be managed. He is a mission. The entire, colossal industrial might of the United States war machine had a single, paradoxical, and breathtakingly ambitious goal when it came to its fighting men: to make the act of being wounded survivable. The German High Command, with its focus on grand strategy and V-2 rockets, never understood this. They never knew that while they were writing off their wounded as acceptable losses, America was building a secret weapon. It wasn't a tank or a plane. It was a system. A golden chain of survival that stretched from the bullet-riddled hedgerow all the way to a fully equipped operating table in England. And at the end of that chain was a number so staggering, so statistically miraculous, it defied every military precedent in human history. 97%. 97% of American soldiers who reached a field hospital alive would survive their wounds. This is the story of the chasm of mercy. It's the story of how two armies, fighting with similar weapons, held two diametrically opposed views on the value of a single human life, and how that difference may have decided the war. To understand the American miracle, we must first descend into the German abyss. The Wehrmacht began the war with a sophisticated, if traditional, medical system. But it was a system designed for blitzkrieg, short, sharp, victorious campaigns. It was utterly unprepared for the meat grinder of the Eastern Front and the sustained pressure of a two-front war. The first link in any medical chain is the combat medic. The German Sanitätssoldat. He was often poorly equipped. While his American counterpart carried multiple doses of morphine in a sleek, Surette needle, the German medic might have only a few morphine tablets. His bandages were basic. But his greatest liability was his training and his doctrine. German medics were instructed to prioritize the walking wounded first. Then those who could be quickly patched up and returned to the fight. The severely wounded, the abdominal shots, the amputations, the massive chest wounds, were often categorized as nicht transportfähig, not transportable. They were made as comfortable as possible and left to the mercy of the enemy or to God. The problem was evacuation. The German army was chronically short of dedicated medical vehicles. They relied on repurposed trucks and horse-drawn wagons. On the vast, primitive road network of Russia, this was a death sentence for a wounded man. A bumpy, days-long journey in a freezing wagon, without plasma or adequate pain relief, would finish what the Soviet bullet had started. And then there was the ideology. The Nazi state was built on a perverted Darwinian principle: the strong survive, the weak perish. This mentality seeped into its military medical core. There was a chilling, bureaucratic term for it: Vernichtung durch Arbeit, extermination through labor. For certain classes of people, including many Slavic prisoners of war who were forced to serve as auxiliaries in medical roles, to be wounded was to be deemed useless, and to be deemed useless was often a death sentence. But the most shocking example of this systemic failure was still to come. A surprise that would redefine the very meaning of desperation on the battlefield. In the winter of 1942-43, the German Sixth Army was surrounded at Stalingrad. 250,000 men were trapped in a frozen hell. This was the ultimate test of the German medical system, and it failed catastrophically. The field hospitals were set up in basements and ruined buildings. But they had almost no supplies. Anesthesia ran out first. Surgeons performed amputations with saws, unconscious men, with only a swig of schnapps for pain relief. Antibiotics were a fantasy. Gangrene and infection were rampant. The stench of putrefying flesh was so thick you could taste it. But the real horror was the evacuation or the lack of it. The Luftwaffe promised a lifeline. But the few planes that made it into the pocket prioritized ammunition and fuel over medical supplies. And on the return flight, they prioritized able-bodied officers over wounded enlisted men. Imagine the scene. A wounded, frostbitten private huddled in a makeshift aid station. Here's the sputtering engine of a Ju-52 transport plane, his ticket out of hell. He watches as it lands, his heart pounding with a fragile hope. He sees the cargo doors open, and out comes not a medic but a staff officer, his uniform clean, his face determined. The plane is refueled with jerrycans of precious aviation fuel. The officer boards. The plane taxis and takes off, leaving the wounded man in the frozen dust. This happened. Not once but repeatedly. The system had not just broken down, it had inverted itself. The chain of survival had become a chain of death. By the time Field Marshal Paulus surrendered, over 90,000 Germans were taken prisoner. Most of them were wounded or sick. Fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. The wounded had been sacrificed not by enemy action, but by their own command's failure of priority. The lesson of Stalingrad echoed across the Wehrmacht. For the German soldier, to be wounded was often a fate worse than death. It bred a deep-seated existential fear. It told every man that he was expendable. A piece on a chessboard to be sacrificed when the game got tough. While this tragedy was unfolding in the East, an ocean away, the United States was preparing for war with a radically different philosophy. And they were building a system that would make the Stalingrad scenario unthinkable. The American approach to military medicine was born from a simple, revolutionary idea. The soldier is the weapon. The rifle, the tank, the plane, these are just tools he uses. If you lose the tool, you can replace it. If you lose the soldier, you have lost the very essence of your army. His training, his experience, his morale. Therefore, the number one priority is to preserve the man. This philosophy gave birth to what we can call the golden chain of survival. This chain had 4 unbreakable links. And the Germans would fail to understand or counter every single one of them. Link 1, the medic. The U.S. Army medic was not just a soldier with a bandage. He was a highly trained specialist. His symbol was the Red Cross, and American troops were drilled to protect that symbol ferociously. He carried a unit of plasma sulfa powder for infection, and that revolutionary morphine syringe. His training focused on immediate, life-saving intervention. Stop the bleeding, manage shock, prevent infection. He was the first and most crucial link. Link 2, rapid evacuation. This was the game changer. While the Germans relied on wagons, the Americans had a fleet of purpose-built vehicles. The Jeep, rugged and ubiquitous, was often used as an ambulance. But the real innovation was the dedicated ambulance, and later, something even more revolutionary we will get to in a moment. The doctrine was simple: the wounded man must not remain at the front. He must be moved to the rear to surgical care within the golden hour, a concept they understood instinctively, even if they didn't have the term yet. Link 3, mobile field hospitals. The chain didn't end at the battalion aid station. The wounded were moved back to mobile army surgical hospitals, the MASH units immortalized in film and television. These were not static buildings. They were tents, trucks, and trailers that could pack up and move with the front line. They were placed just outside of artillery range, often no more than 10 to 15 miles from the fighting. This proximity was critical. A soldier wounded in the morning could be on an operating table by the afternoon. Link 4, the miracle of plasma and penicillin. This is where American industrial and scientific might came into play. The Germans struggled to produce enough blood for transfusions. The Americans, through a massive civilian donation program, mastered the production of dried plasma. It was lightweight, stable, and could be reconstituted with sterile water in seconds on the front line. It fought shock, the silent killer of the wounded. And then came penicillin. While the Germans had limited access, the United States ramped up production to an industrial scale, flooding its medical units with the first true antibiotic. Infection, which killed more soldiers than bullets in previous wars, was suddenly being defeated. But there was one more link, a secret weapon so unexpected, so visually stunning, that it would become the ultimate symbol of American medical superiority. A weapon the Germans had no answer for. The war in the Pacific presented a unique problem. How do you evacuate wounded men from dense, roadless jungles or from tiny, contested islands? The answer came from an unlikely source, the helicopter. It was a primitive machine, the Sikorsky R-4. It was slow, fragile, and had a limited range. But it could do something no other vehicle could. It could hover. It could land in a clearing no larger than a tennis court. Its first major combat medical evacuation was in Burma in 1944. A wounded British soldier was extracted from a remote jungle location and flown directly to a hospital. The mission was a success. The implications were earth-shattering. Suddenly, the golden hour shrank to minutes. A soldier who would have died during a grueling day-long stretcher carry could now be in a surgical tent in under 30 minutes. The helicopter was immune to roadblocks, minefields, and destroyed bridges. It flew over the battlefield, a literal angel of mercy. While the Germans were still relying on slow, vulnerable ambulances on bomb-cratered roads, the Americans were perfecting a system of aerial evacuation that would become the standard for the rest of the century. The sight and sound of that helicopter rotor became a powerful psychological boost for every American soldier. It was a tangible promise: we will come for you, no matter where you are. This was the final, unbreachable link in the golden chain. It was a technological and doctrinal leap that the German High Command, still thinking in terms of railroads and horse-drawn pange wagons, could never have anticipated. Now let's see this system put to the ultimate test. Let's go to the blood-soaked forests of Europe, 1944. The Hurtgen Forest, late 1944. It was some of the most brutal, close-quarters fighting of the entire Western Front. The terrain was a nightmare of dense woods, steep ravines, and mud. It was a German defensive planner's dream and an attacker's hell. For the Americans, it became a meat grinder. But it was also the perfect demonstration of their medical system under the worst possible conditions. Imagine a young infantryman, we'll call him Private Miller. A shell explodes nearby. Shrapnel tears into his leg and abdomen. He's bleeding heavily, going into shock. First link. Within minutes, his squad's medic is there. The morphine syringe goes into his arm. Sulfa powder is poured into the wounds. Pressure bandages are applied. A unit of plasma is hung from a rifle stuck in the ground, the bottle feeding life back into him. Second link. A litter team is called. They carry him, under fire, back to the battalion aid station, a log bunker just behind the front line. Here, a doctor stabilizes him further. He's tagged with his wounds and treatment. The decision is made, he needs surgery now. Third link. An ambulance waiting just outside loads him up. It navigates the shell-pocked forest trails to a MASH unit a few miles back. The journey is rough, but it takes an hour, not a day. He arrives at the MASH. The tents are a hive of controlled chaos. The smell of antiseptic is overpowering. He is rushed to pre-op, then into an operating tent. Skilled surgeons, working in shifts around the clock, repair the damage. Penicillin flows into his veins, fighting off the bacteria from the dirt and filth of the forest. The entire process, from wound to surgery, has taken less than 3 hours. Private Miller would survive. He would go home. He was one of thousands. This was the relentless, mechanical efficiency of the golden chain. It was a medical assembly line in reverse, putting men back together instead of taking them apart. And at the end of this line was that number, 97%. Let that number sink in. For every 100 American soldiers who made it to a field hospital alive, 97 walked out, or were evacuated safely home. This statistic is not propaganda, it is historical fact, born from after-action reports and medical records. The German survival rate? It's harder to pin down due to poor record-keeping and systemic collapse, but historians estimate it was likely below 80% on the Eastern Front, and not much higher in the West. That difference of nearly 20 percentage points represents hundreds of thousands of lives. This had a strategic impact far beyond mere humanity. American morale was sky-high. Men fought with the confidence that if they were hit, they had a fighting chance. German morale, by late 1944, was crumbling. A German soldier knew that a wound could mean a slow, agonizing death in a field, or a one-way trip to a Soviet gulag. This knowledge sapped the will to fight. The American medical system was, in itself, a weapon of war. The war ended, the MASH units packed up their tents. The helicopters were improved. But the golden chain did not break, it was reforged for peace. The lessons learned in the fields of Normandy and the forests of Hurtgen revolutionized civilian emergency medicine across the United States and the world. 1. The Emergency Medical Services (EMS) system, the concept of trained first responders, the modern EMT and paramedic, is a direct descendant of the combat medic. Their bags contain advanced versions of the same tools: tourniquets, hemostatic agents, 4 fluids. 2. The golden hour. This became the foundational principle of trauma care. The understanding that the first 60 minutes after a traumatic injury are critical for survival is now drilled into every emergency room doctor and paramedic. It was a lesson written in the blood of soldiers and proven on a mass scale. 3. Widespread use of helicopters. The success of the medical helicopter in Burma and Korea led directly to the civilian air ambulance services we have today. The sight of a life flight helicopter landing at a hospital is a direct legacy of the Sikorsky R-4. 4. Mass production of antibiotics and blood products. The wartime drive to produce penicillin and plasma created the infrastructure for the modern pharmaceutical and blood bank industries, saving countless millions of lives from infection and shock. The system built to save the soldier became the system that saves the citizen. The teenager in a car crash, the construction worker falling from a scaffold, the heart attack victim, they are all beneficiaries of the medical revolution forged in World War II. The German generals, in their rigid focus on tactics and hardware, never saw it coming. They never understood that the most powerful force on the battlefield is not the will to destroy, but the will to save. They never knew that the quiet hum of a plasma bottle, the swift hands of a medic, and the thudding rotors of a helicopter were as decisive as any tank division. They built a war machine that consumed its own. America built a system that cherished its citizens in uniform. In the end, that fundamental difference in value, the price of a single human life, may have been the ultimate deciding factor. So the next time you see an ambulance racing down the street or hear the distant thrum of a medical helicopter, remember that those are echoes. Echoes of a promise made in the chaos of war, a promise that no one would be left behind. The concrete bunkers of the Atlantic Wall still stand, monuments to a fortress that failed. But the true, enduring victory is not carved in stone. It's coded into our hospitals, it's trained into our paramedics, it's flying in our skies. It is the living legacy of the 97%. A number that didn't just win a war but changed the world one life at a time.